Namaste everyone, this is a song by Sant Kabir Das. I'll share a brief translation. Drink the drizzling nectar, my friend, today the sky is showering in bliss. A drop is all that I need. Tell me, how and whom do I explain this to? The water is only for the one who is thirsty. Without being worthy, you can never taste it. By drinking this nectar, you achieve the state of immortality and no longer suffer. Guru's utterances are these drops of nectar. This nectar is the way of life.
धारा गगन में झड़ी लगी, पीले अमीरस धारा गगन में झड़ी लगी, झड़ी लगी हाँ झड़ी लगी, झड़ी लगी हाँ झड़ी लगी, पीले अमीरस धारा गगन में झड़ी लगी। का प्यासा घड़ा भर पाया, सपने में वो स्वाद न आया। बूंद का प्यासा घड़ा भर पाया, सपने में वो स्वाद न आया। कहो किसे कैसे समझाऊं, कहो किसे कैसे समझाऊं, एक बूंद की तरण लगी, पीले अमीरस धारा गगन में झड़ी लगी, पीले अमीरस धारा गगन में झड़ी लगी। प्यास बिना क्या पीवे रे पानी, प्यासे के लिए है ये पानी। प्यास बिना क्या पीवे रे पानी, प्यासे के लिए है ये पानी। बिना अधिकार कोई नहीं जानी, बिन अधिकार कोई नहीं जानी, अमृत रस की झड़ी लगी, पीले अमीरस धारा गगन में झड़ी लगी। हाँ पीले अमीरस धारा गगन में झड़ी लगी, झड़ी लगी हाँ झड़ी लगी, झड़ी लगी हाँ झड़ी लगी, पीले अमीरस धारा गगन में झड़ी लगी। अमीरस पीवे पवन पद पावे, भाव योनि में कबहू न आवे। अमीरस पीवे अमर पद पावे, भाव योनि में कबहू न आवे। जरा मरण का वो दुख न सावे, जरा मरण का वो दुख न सावे, घट की घगरिया चरण लगी, पीले अमीरस धारा गगन में झड़ी लगी। हाँ, पीले अमीरस धारा गगन में झड़ी लगी। बूंद अमीरस गुरु की वाणी, जीवन रास्ता है ये वाणी। बूंद अमीरस गुरु की वाणी, जीवन रास्ता है ये वाणी। कबीर संगत में हो हमारी, कबीर संगत में हो हमारी, डाली प्रेम की हरी भरी, पीले अमीरस धारा गगन में झड़ी लगी। हाँ, पीले अमीरस धारा गगन में झड़ी लगी। झड़ी लगी, हाँ झड़ी लगी, झड़ी लगी, हाँ झड़ी लगी, पीले अमीरस धारा गगन में झड़ी लगी। हो माझी माझी रे,
Good morning, welcome everyone. You all know, I'm sure, that we're reaching the end of our one-year celebration of our Silver Jubilee year, 25th anniversary of the founding of the Vedanta Center of Greater Washington, D.C. We've tried to have a special program each month. This is the final month before the concluding program, so we're very, very happy that Dr. Jefferey Long has agreed to come. He's a very dear friend of ours. He's been here many times. He's spoken at our retreats on different occasions. He's a professor of religion, philosophy, and Asian studies in Elizabethtown College in Pennsylvania. And he has a very interesting topic today: what makes the four yogas work, Swami Vivekananda's philosophy of yogic pluralism. So we'll invite you, Jeff, to please come talk to us.
Thank you, Maharaj, for that kind welcome, and thank you all for being here today. It's so good to be back. I think this is my first time speaking here since the pandemic started, I believe. And the last time I spoke here was just days before everything shut down. I don't know how many of you were here. I gave a talk on Albert Einstein's spirituality way back in early March of 2020. That was a Sunday. I think about half the number of people were here that are here today, because it was already starting to get a little scary. And I think it was that Thursday that the whole world shut down. So it's wonderful to be back, and grateful to be here with all of you. And thank you again, Swami Atmaganananda, for inviting me here today. So namaste, namaskar, good morning. And thank you all, in the words of Swami Vivekananda, for your warm and cordial welcome. I'm always grateful to speak here at the DC Vedanta Society. I feel at home here, and I'm honored and privileged to be able to share my thoughts with you in this sacred place. In my presentation today, I'm going to share with you my own understanding of the four yogas as taught by Swami Vivekananda. This understanding has been shaped, of course, by the teaching of Sri Ramakrishna, the Holy Mother, and Swamiji himself, and the wisdom of the many Swamis and Pravajakas of the Ramakrishna order with whom it's been my honor to associate through the years. I would especially want to note the guidance of my guru in this regard, as well as the work of my friend and fellow scholar, Swami Swahananda. In particular, if you wish to explore in greater depth the ideas I'll be sharing today, especially near the end of my presentation, I recommend Swami Swahananda's recent book, Swami Vivekananda's Vedantic Cosmopolitanism, and his earlier book, Infinite Paths to Infinite Reality, Sri Ramakrishna and Cross-Cultural Philosophy of Religion. Finally, my perspective has also been shaped by the teachings of the great sages, the rishis and arhats, the Buddhas and bodhisattvas, the prophets and saints, and the philosophers and theologians of the world's traditions, which it's been my deep privilege to study through the years. I'm mentioning all these thinkers to express my gratitude to them and to avoid the false and immodest claim that what I'm sharing with you today is entirely my own. It's not. That being said, though, I'll say that any errors in what I present today, those are mine. Those are entirely my responsibility. The question I'm posing today is, what makes the 4 yogas work? It's well known that, according to Swami Vivekananda, the 4 yogas, Karma Yoga, the yoga of selfless action, Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of loving devotion, Jnana Yoga, the yoga of knowledge, and Raja Yoga or Dhyana Yoga, the yoga of meditation, are effective and independent paths to what is variously termed God realization, self-realization with a capital S, enlightenment, salvation, or liberation, that is moksha. My question is, what is the mechanism by which these 4 sets of practices bring about their shared goal? Answering this question requires us to delve into the nature of realization itself. What is it that is being realized? Who is realizing it? From what are we being liberated? And to what are we being liberated? That is, if our current state is one of bondage, what would it mean to be free? Of what does that freedom consist for which we're striving? In order to answer these questions, we need to understand how we became bound in the first place. This will take us back to the mystery of creation itself. Why is there anything at all? In particular, why do we exist as we do now in the kind of universe in which we find ourselves? So my first section, this exploration, is called The Many Emerge from the One. A quick note about creation. When we speak of creation in the Vedantic sense, we're not referring to a specific moment in time, a beginning point at which reality as we know it started. In the traditions of India, as in those of many other parts of the world, it's understood that creation is an ongoing process. Creation is happening right now, at this very moment. We tell stories about it as something that happened long ago because we're accustomed to thinking and speaking within our current frame of reference, which is shaped by the phenomena of time, space, and causation. We therefore think in terms of things having a beginning, a middle, and an end. And we tend to understand things through narratives that are shaped in just this way. The Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain traditions all invite us, however, to think in a different way and to see our linear narrative way of constructing reality as just one frame of reference, one possible way of organizing what we know. We need, therefore, to understand that this way of thinking is convenient for us, but it's not a perfect or complete representation of the nature of reality. The Taoist tradition of China, as well as much of contemporary physics, is very much in line with this traditional Indic way of thinking, as is the thought of many modern philosophers. In the Tao Te Ching of the 6th century BC, Chinese sage Lao Tzu, it is said that all that exists emerges from an eternal reality which Lao Tzu terms the Tao, or the way. He tells us that, quote, the way that can be named is not the eternal way. He then says that the nameless is the origin of the myriad creatures. That, at least, is the translation of scholar Victor Mayer. In other translations, the phrase the myriad creatures is translated as the 10,000 things. There are, of course, many, many more than 10,000 things, even on our relatively tiny corner of the universe, but this was a conventional way that philosophers referred to our phenomenal world in ancient China. Similarly, the Upanishads, some of which were composed around the same time frame, which are the original textual fountainhead of the Vedanta tradition, speak in many places of the emergence of the many from the one. In the 4th section of the 1st chapter of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, for example, it's said in a very playful fashion that the one became the many by dividing itself into countless beings, desiring companionship. The one was alone, so felt lonely, so became the many. This is, of course, an analogy, one of many possible ways of describing this ultimate mystery. Later on, in the Advaita Vedanta tradition, it's affirmed that the one does not literally divide itself, but it only appears to do so. This process of creation through appearance is known as Maya, a term which is cognate with our English word magic. Maya is the power of creation, through which the one, the infinite Brahman, the nameless and indescribable Tao, gives rise to and manifests as the manifold world of phenomena, the cosmos we experience as our reality. In the words of Sri Ramakrishna, and in fact we were just reading this passage earlier today over in the house, those who realize Brahman, the Vijnanis, find that it is Brahman that has become the universe and its living things. We ourselves are, of course, manifestations of the one infinite reality, infinite, finite centers of an infinite consciousness. So, next section, the process of differentiation and the ego. The process of creation, the Maya by which the one manifests as the many, is a process of differentiation. The infinite one projects from itself the infinitely many. Our sense of individuality is therefore closely bound up with the process of creation itself. As it's described in the Sankhya system of Indian philosophy, we become differentiated from one another and from the rest of the realm of nature, or prakriti, by something called ahankara. Ahankara, which literally means the I maker, is the mechanism by which we come to perceive ourselves as individual beings, distinct from one another and from the rest of the cosmos. The Latin equivalent of ahankara, which has found its way into the English language as well, is ego, or ego, as we say in English. Analogously with ego, ahankara or ahankar in modern Indian languages often refers to pride or an excessive attachment to one's individuality as the most important thing in the world, overriding even our sense of compassion and empathy for other beings. Right? This happens if we're terribly, terribly egotistical. This ego, importantly, is not our real identity. We are not, according to Sankhya philosophy, prakriti, we are purusha, or spirit, which has misidentified itself with this physical, phenomenal world. This is our first clue to the answer to our original question: what makes the four yogas work? Individuality itself is not an evil thing. Indeed, it is integral to the process by which the one infinite reality has manifested itself as this wonderful universe. Individuality is an essential element, we could say, of the divine plan. The question is often raised, why does the infinite one choose to appear as the many? If it is already perfect and self-sufficient, what need does it have to manifest itself as the myriad beings making up the cosmos, as us? Many answers to this question are possible and have been proposed in the world's traditions, and all of them probably bear some amount of truth. One hears that the cosmos is the divine lila, or play. Sri Ramakrishna was very fond of this particular answer. In other words, the Infinite One simply takes delight in manifesting and experiencing itself as all of us, the beings which constitute this vast universe. One also sometimes hears the speculation that as the ground of all being, and as consisting of infinite being, consciousness, and bliss, anantaram satchit anandam, the one needs to divide itself into the many in order to fully become what it is in its pure infinite potential. Consciousness is an experience, and thus requires one who is conscious and one of whom one is conscious, a subject and an object. Bliss or joy is an experience, and thus requires an enjoyer and that which is enjoyed. So the one becomes the object of its own awareness by dividing into infinite centers of awareness, us. It literally enjoys itself by becoming, in the same way, infinite centers of enjoyment. Again, us. As non-dualism teaches us, this consciousness and bliss are in reality non-dual and without subject and object. But when the veil of Maya, the matrix of space, time, and causation, are projected onto them, they manifest as infinite beings striving for infinite consciousness and infinite bliss. Yet another answer, why does the one become the many, is that this entire process is a mystery with no rational answer. It cannot be known with the finite mind, but only realized, that is, experienced directly, as we ourselves are the one which is manifested as these myriad beings. We don't know it, we become it. We manifest it. The problem with individuality is not that it is bad, but it is a kind of self-forgetting on the part of the Infinite One. It involves a sense of being cut off from, of being other than our true self, again, self with a capital S, the Atman, and a corresponding alienation from our fellow centers of consciousness, our fellow beings, who we begin to see as other than ourselves. Part of the process of the one's self-manifestation as this vast cosmos is this very sense of self-alienation. It is this alienation from our true self, our entrapment in what becomes the prison of the ego, which we instinctively wish to overcome. This is the essence of what we refer to as our sense of bondage. A bondage that creates within us a sense of that there must be something better, right? That we want to be free. We experience this mumukshutva, this desire for freedom, initially as a desire for happiness. In the words of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, the purpose of life is to be happy. This was one of the favorite expressions of my late father-in-law as well. I think he said it just about every time I ever met with him. The aim of life is to be happy. One is, of course, free to disagree, but I'm firmly convinced that this is the case. In fact, everyone wants to be happy. One could, of course, point to people who seem to enjoy being unhappy. I'm sure we all know some of them. I would argue, though, that it is this very unhappiness that makes them happy, at least for the time being. We all do the things we do because we want to be happy. We act either for immediate happiness, immediate gratification, or for our long-term happiness, sometimes by taking on very difficult work and a lot of short-term unhappiness, or at least discomfort, whether our aim be material or spiritual. In reply to the possible objection that saying that happiness is our fundamental motivation in life, that this sounds selfish, I would respond that this objection assumes that it's possible to be really and truly happy when others are unhappy. Now again, we see people who seem to be absolutely delighted when others are unhappy. But I would suggest that this is not the happiness we're really seeking, for reasons which should hopefully become clear very soon. As our soul's journey unfolds, we find that our own happiness is ultimately bound up with the happiness of all beings. We all wish to be happy, but because of our alienation from our true self and our sense of otherness from the rest of creation and what we mistakenly take to be other beings, we typically don't know how to go about being happy. The most obvious source of happiness is, of course, the gratification of the senses. I see something beautiful, I hear some good music, I eat a nice meal, and I'm happy. This, however, is the most ephemeral, most temporary source of happiness. It lasts only as long as there's contact between our senses and their objects, or perhaps later on as a memory of such contact. If we think in terms of the purusharthas, the aims of life described in the ancient Hindu texts, this form of happiness, or kama, is the most fleeting. Kama, not to be confused with karma, which we're going to talk about in a bit. A life spent solely in pursuit of sensory gratification is a life where we experience brief moments of happiness, interspersed with moments where we are anticipating the next moment of happiness, nostalgically recalling previous moments of happiness, or feeling frustrated because the next moment of happiness is not coming soon enough. This, we could say, is an immature state of being, and we've all been there. Right? This is part of our evolution. Again, this is not because sensory gratification is an inherently bad thing. Any happiness we experience, even sensory pleasure, is a glimmer of the infinite happiness of the one we are seeking, of Brahman. But this is the most limited form of happiness, and one which easily leads to unhappiness when we do not get what we want when we want it. Indeed, the Buddha referred to this form of happiness as in truth a form of unhappiness, as suffering or dukkha, precisely because it is so unstable and ephemeral. If we follow the scheme of the Purusharthas, we know that a more enduring happiness can be found if we work hard and achieve the means for enjoying the senses on a reliable and regular basis, by acquiring artha, which means power or wealth. In fact, the dual meaning of artha as both power and wealth is quite ingenious, as it conveys the idea that in this world, wealth is a type of power. If I have $1, I have the ability, the power, to acquire $1's worth of goods that can give me happiness. Meaning, of course, temporary happiness. Very temporary with $1 nowadays, but, it's something. If I have $100, I have 100 times more power to acquire what I want, and so on. The same problem, though, that attaches to sensory enjoyment also attaches to money and power. In the words of the famous phrase, you probably all know what I'm about to say, you can't take it with you. Even the wealthiest person in the world is not able to carry their wealth into their next life. Also, as we evolve in our spiritual journey across many lifetimes, we realize that the happiness money can yield is, like sense pleasure, a temporary thing. Money and power have more utility than a single object of sensory gratification because they enable us to come in contact with many such objects. But at a certain point, we start to realize that the deeper longings of our being are simply not satisfied by material things. It's noteworthy in this regard that suicide rates tend to be the highest in those parts of the world that are the wealthiest. Because people are not only frustrated that all their wealth is not getting them what they want, but because they think that's how you get happiness, they're thinking, well, if I have all this and I can't be happy, then happiness is just not possible. They despair. We need something much greater than either sensory gratification or the means of acquiring it. Higher than both of these in the traditional scheme of Purusharthas, and typically listed first, is dharma. In this context, dharma refers to our duties toward others. Contrary to what our sense of alienation may compel us to believe, we are not alone in this world. We live amongst the myriad beings who are all manifestations of that same infinite reality, which is the source and essence of our own existence. True and lasting happiness is therefore not to be found in isolation. It involves the happiness of others as well. Even the solitary sage, who appears isolated, who seeks liberation alone on a mountaintop, works for the good of all living beings. This work may manifest as an invisible influence on the world, but it is nevertheless real. Swami Vivekananda speaks of this when he says, quote, "The greatest men in the world have passed away unknown. Hundreds of these unknown heroes have lived in every country, working silently. Silently they live and silently they pass away. And in time, their thoughts find expression in Buddhas or Christs. And it is these latter that become known to us." So behind every great sage we see, there are countless unseen, unspeaking, silent sages. As we continue to evolve in our spiritual journey, we start to realize the deep joy that arises from giving joy to others. And unlike material wealth, you can take the fruits of your good deeds, your dharmic actions, with you. This is what is popularly known as good karma, punya karma. Now, as we shall see, and contrary to popular misconceptions, good karma does not lead to God realization, at least not directly, although it can create the conditions in which realization can occur, like being born in a spiritual family. But good karma does not lead by itself to true and lasting happiness. The good that comes from doing good, from dharma, is also bound by time. It is temporary. This is something the sages of the Upanishads realized long ago, and is why we find criticism of the rituals that lead to finite goods, such as rebirth in heaven, in texts like the Mundaka Upanishad and the Bhagavad Gita. Right, some of those passages can be puzzling. You say, it sounds like they're attacking the Vedas. Why would a Vedic text attack the Vedas? They're not attacking the Vedas. They're saying the ritualistic, action-based portion, it'll get you to heaven, which is pretty great, but you'll eventually come back down into this cycle of rebirth. It's not permanent. It's not the ultimate good. It's not that good karma and the works that produce it are bad. any more than sensory objects and wealth are bad, right? They are finite. In order to experience the results of our good actions, we must act again and again and again. It's only with the fourth Purushartha, the fourth goal of life, moksha or liberation, that one experiences a joy which is infinite and unending in the realization of our own true nature, which we have forgotten in our egoistic individuality, as an effect of the way the world came into being. So now we finally come to the four yogas. Right? How do we reach moksha? How do we achieve God realization? The realization of our true infinite self, which is manifested in the form of our limited individuality. First, realization is not a result of action. Again, good karma does not lead to it, at least not directly. If realization were the product of an action, it would be limited, as all products of action are. You would have to keep doing whatever you did to achieve it in order to sustain it. It would not be the lasting happiness which it in fact is. It would simply be a more refined version of good karma. Secondly, if realization is not a result of action, this is the most radical thing I'm going to say today, this means we literally can do nothing to achieve it. To refer again to the Taoist tradition, the sage Lao Tzu recommends something called Wu Wei, which translated literally means doing nothing. Now, this doesn't mean being a spiritual slacker. As Lord Krishna points out in the Bhagavad Gita, it's literally impossible to do nothing. Particularly as beings who identify with physical bodies, we find that even if we try to be very, very still, such as when we meditate, we nevertheless continue to breathe. Our bodily processes continue to operate. Similarly, our minds continue to be active, even if we sit still. It takes great effort to still the mind, a process which the Gita compares to taming the wind. Even the Lord himself, the Infinite One, acts constantly to uphold the world, a process called loka sangraha, right? The upholding of the world. Right? God is acting right now to sustain all of this. Doing nothing, then, does not mean literally doing nothing. As Lord Krishna explains in the 3rd chapter of the Gita, it means acting without a sense of doership, right? Acting without acting, acting with detachment. It is realizing that it is the Infinite One who is in fact the doer of all action. All that occurs in all the myriad universes of existence is the action, the manifestation of the only one who in the end really does exist, the infinite Brahman. Who else is there to engage in action? To act in this way, not out of attachment to the fruit of our individualistic desires and actions, but not out of desire for temporary happiness, but for the good of all beings, is to surrender one's sense of doership to the divine reality, to step aside and let the Divine Mother, the Tao, the infinite Brahman, work through us. To quote from the Star Wars films, let the Force flow through you. Or to paraphrase the Apostle Paul, it is not I who acts, but Christ who acts through me. This surrender of one's sense of doership and of allowing the Infinite One to work through us is thus central to the process of attaining realization and liberation, and brings us very close to the answer to our question. We're almost there. What makes the four yogas work? Recall that at the fountainhead of the process by which the one manifests as the many, as all of us myriad beings, is the phenomenon of individuation, the arising of the ahankara, the ego. It is this ego that gives rise to our sense of individuality, this wonderful individuality that enables us to see reality from a unique, unrepeatable perspective, to cultivate the special gifts which only we can in turn give back to the world. But it is this same individuality which, if we remain caught up in it, if we become attached to it, alienates us from others and from our true self, and gives rise to all of our suffering. The four yogas work by attenuating this sense of individuality. When we are egotistical, if we are caught up in our individual desires without regard for others, and see ourselves as being cut off from the rest of existence, our ego, we can say, is opaque. The light of the infinite reality, which is its true source, is getting through to us only dimly, like sunlight concealed by thick black smoke. But as we open the ego to others and to the infinite, as we let it unfold like a flower, it starts to become translucent, right? The smoke clears, the clouds go away, more light comes in. We feel an increasingly sustainable sense of happiness and real joy in our lives. And when the ego becomes completely transparent, such that there's no visible barrier whatsoever between I, the individual, and I, the infinite, then realization has been achieved. The one shines through like the sun on a clear and bright day, like today, until eventually that light is all that we see and all that we are. The four yogas function to achieve this very translucency and ultimate transparency of the ego. Swami Vivekananda sees these yogas not as mutually exclusive, but as mutually affirming. There are four yogas and not only one to suit four basic personality types: emotional, intellectual, active, and contemplative. We could keep dividing those almost infinitely, and ultimately we would find there are as many yogas as there are living beings. But we have to speak simply, right? So talking about types makes it very easy for us to categorize and understand the phenomena that we're seeing around us. In Swamiji's own words, we classify the yogas in the following way under four heads. 1. Karma Yoga, the manner in which a man realizes his own divinity through work and duty. By the way, I think if Swamiji were speaking today, he would say a person. He was speaking in the 1890s, so I think we should not be too worried that he's using the male pronoun there. He's talking about human beings. Bhakti Yoga, the realization of the divinity through devotion to and love of a personal God. 3. Raja Yoga, the realization of the divinity through the control of the mind. 4. Jnana Yoga, the realization of a man's own divinity through knowledge. Ultimately, again, there are, according to Swami Vivekananda, as many yogas as there are individual beings seeking liberation. We can think of the four yogas as four clusters of practices, and the yoga of each individual as a highly specific combination of these practices, unique to the individual's personality. Why so many yogas? Why this yogic pluralism? We've all been on this journey for a long time. We've all individuated in different ways. We manifest in different cultures, different parts of the world, different climates, different periods of history, different types of body, different genders, ethnicities, different species, because we're not just talking about human beings here. We're talking about all beings. And so for each of us, what is going to be helpful on this path is going to vary in its specifics. And in fact, Swamiji goes on to say that the diversity of the yogas gives rise to the diversity of the world's religions. Religions are themselves essentially clusters of the yogas, right? And at the risk of getting stereotypical, because you can actually find all four yogas in every major tradition, but one will tend to be predominant in a tradition. Christianity, for example, seems very much to be a path of bhakti yoga, right? It's all about the loving relationship with Christ, and so on. Advaita Vedanta, very much jnana yoga, right? It's about discerning the nature of existence. So these yogas form the basis of religions, belief systems, ways of living. And interestingly, and sometimes people get mad when I say this, because a lot of people don't like the word religion, but if you look at the Latin root of religion, religio, it means something which binds you, right? Something which ties you back to your source. And if you look at the root of yoga, it's also that, right? It's cognate with yoke. It's something that binds and unites us. Often religion is translated as dharma or dharma in Indian languages, but I think yoga is a good translation for that. And this is a rather mind-bending when your first association with the word yoga is people doing exercise in a gym. It's like, oh, you mean they're doing it religiously? No, we're talking about something else. Right? We're talking about the roots of what these practices are. So the classification of the yogas as four in number is a matter of convenience, done for the sake of typology. It's not meant to be restrictive, to imply that there are four and only four ways to realize God. And nor, as Swamiji repeatedly says, are the yogas to be seen as mutually exclusive. In fact, they work very well in tandem together. that your life will be enriched if you have some of all of them, even if you feel particularly drawn maybe to one or the other. Among the four yogas, Raja Yoga and Jnana Yoga, the yogas of meditation and knowledge respectively, can sound quite similar given that both are focused on the mind. The approach of Jnana Yoga, however, is cognitive, the elimination of false identifications of the self, such as with the body or the mind, aimed at giving rise to the certain knowledge, jnana, that the Atman, the self, and Brahman are one. The approach of Raja Yoga is, one could say, more phenomenological. We still our thoughts with the aim of directly realizing our divine nature through the experience of samadhi. In Jnana Yoga, we use the mind to go beyond the mind by negating our dualistic mental constructs. If you think of the Zen tradition, right, the practice of the koan, you have a riddle with no logical, literal answer, and its aim is to show the mind its own limits. There are similar deconstructive practices in Advaita Vedanta. You finally reach a point where the mind stops and it's only the self. In Raja Yoga, we restrain the mind and still it with the aim of experiencing that which is beyond it. Swami Vivekananda compares the mind to a lake, right, to a body of water. And if you make the waves on the surface, our thoughts, very, very still, you can see what's at the bottom, what is beyond the mind. The mind is clouded by all of these waves of the mind. And this goes all the way back to Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, Yoga's Chitta Vritti Nirodha. That is, yoga, meaning here meditation, Raja Yoga, is the stilling of the waves of the mind. In both of these practices, the ego is attenuated. Jnana Yoga does this through its intellectual deconstruction, the process of neti neti, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this. Raja Yoga does this by quieting the ego, removing our attention from it and stilling the vibrations of the mind, and simply allowing the true self to shine through. I think this last point is very important. Swamiji talks a lot in his book Raja Yoga about concentration and about attention. And for anyone listening who suffers from any kind of anxiety, you wake up at 3 a.m. with some obsessive thought bothering you, attention is fuel for those thoughts. So you have to direct the attention elsewhere and to where you want it to be. And then you'll find your mind strengthening. If we attain realization through these methods, jnana or Raja Yoga, we may experience it as an awakening to our true self, a recovery of an identity that was only apparently lost, but that was in fact there all along. We were always enlightened. We were always free. We just didn't know it yet. Bhakti Yoga, on the other hand, melts the ego, as it were, in divine love. Through opening ourselves up to the Infinite One as a being of infinite love, and allowing ourselves to experience our utter dependence on this loving divine reality, the ego's illusion of independence comes to be dissolved, and with it, its stranglehold on our consciousness. In the end, the divine beloved, in whatever form it has drawn us to itself, is all that matters. And we're willing to sacrifice even our very sense of self to be nearer to that one who's at the heart of our deepest aspirations. If we get realization through bhakti, we'll experience it as a loving union, a communion with the divine beloved, less a dissolution of self than a completing of self, and at least at a certain phase of the process, as a healing of a self that's been broken, that feels itself broken by the process of individuation. Finally, karma yoga is living a life of service to the other suffering beings with whom we share the world. This yoga attenuates the ego because it involves our putting the needs of others ahead of our own. As in bhakti yoga, our willingness to sacrifice ourselves for others is a sign and an expression of the dissolution of egotism. It is this dissolution of the ego that enables the light of the true self, the infinitely loving, infinitely blissful, infinitely conscious divinity who resides in all beings and in whom all beings reside, to shine forth in its fullness. This is the realization that liberates us from the prison of ego and enables us to be truly free. Interestingly, Swami Vivekananda says one can do this practice without even having any particular religious belief. We see people who are very motivated by love for other beings, humanity, animals, the earth itself, and this itself is a purifying impulse, according to Swami Vivekananda. Such people may be very skeptical about religion because they might see it as interfering with the process of helping others, or as even a source of suffering in the world. But that does not mean these people are barred from liberation. That the pure desire to relieve the suffering of others and the work we do for that, if we are on this path, is something that can itself be liberating. For one who attains through karma yoga realization, it might be experienced as a profound solidarity with all beings, as a restoration of relation among the beings making up the cosmos from whom we had been alienated, a harmony in which we have surrendered our selfish ego, placing the good of all beings before our own and making it our highest desire. The Jewish tradition speaks of tikkun olam. I don't know if I've pronounced it correctly, but the repairing of the world, right? That this is our dharma, right? This is our duty. This is really the essence of realization through karma yoga. So in conclusion, what makes the four yogas work, the precise mechanism by which they lead to liberation, is through the attenuation and eventual annihilation of the ego as a principle of separation from the rest of existence. We move from being centers of selfishness and fear to being centers of love, with our being eventually mingling and becoming one with that of all beings and with being itself, whether through intellect, meditation, devotion, or service. Thus do we move, in the words of the Upanishads, from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. So thank you all very much. That's the end of my presentation. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. We always enjoy hearing your presentations, and it's nice for you to be here. And I can't forget Mahua also. Jeff's lovely wife, who's equally brilliant in her own field. Is a Japanese specialist, who now will be starting a new field, into the counseling and everything. So very nice that both of you could come. I wanted to just make a couple announcements about next weekend. We had invited Swami Chaitananandaji as our featured speaker. He came back from India with a little bit of a health problem, and unfortunately has had to cancel. So we'll have new flyers out, and we had to take out the old flyers there with his name. We'll redo all of that, and now our speakers will be Swami Sarvadevanandaji from Southern California. He, of course, is officially in charge of our center. And Swami Tattvamayanandaji, Swami Prapananandaji, also from California, and Swami Ishatmanandaji from Chicago, Swami Nirmalatmanandaji from Brazil will be coming, and Pravrajika Shuddhatma Pranaji from Ridgely. Did I get everybody? I think so. So go to our website and you'll see the schedule and everything. The one thing to be noted is we've moved up our evening Arati to 6 o'clock instead of 6:30 every night, because there'll be evening programs also, and it won't get so late. So we encourage everyone to join us for that, a very big program. This will be the concluding ceremony of the 25th anniversary year of our center. So you're all invited to come. It'll also be on YouTube, live streaming in YouTube and everything. Now we invite you all to come join us for refreshments. It'll be a chance for you to ask some questions of Jeffrey also. So.